being contagious. How many of you are contagious? It's still a repeat of the test. Every hand should be up because you all are contagious. It might just be what you're contagious with that we need to be worried about. Right, choir? You know, when we talked about being contagious, we talked about it being important because people matter. Turn to somebody and say, people matter. They still matter. Say it. They still matter. Every day they matter. And so then we talked about how if people really matter, then they need to be, or we need to be, salt and light. Jesus says, you are the salt and you are the light. He doesn't say, go be the salt, go be the light. He says, you are the salt, you are the light. And we discovered that he tells us that we are to be the salt because our job is to make people thirsty for God. So turn to somebody and say, I'm thirsty. And then he said, you're the light. And the light is always to point to Christ and to the story. Well then, if that wasn't enough, as we talked about being contagious, we talked about how it was supposed to be something that all of us can do and be, and we know that. And that all of us are called to be plowed and planted with the Word, so God can pick the harvest. And that brings us to today. Because we're supposed to be interested in people because they matter, and because we're supposed to be caring for people because they matter, today we learn that we have to sometimes tell the story. The story. Now, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I asked one of our church members if they were going to be here on Mother's Day, and they told me no, they always go somewhere else on Mother's Day. And I thought, great, because I have a story about you. And I really don't like to tell stories about people unless they're here. So as I was trying to figure out what it meant to really be contagious and how it works in story form, I remembered my first Sunday here. And people telling me, oh, we do the coolest thing at the end of worship. I said, cool. They say, we sing the Lord's Prayer together. We hold hands and everything. They didn't tell me everything. I said, great. So we got to the end of the worship service. We're singing the song. You all know, Our Father, who art, yada, yada, yada. And it gets to the end, and it builds up, and then all of a sudden, the person next to me raises my hand. And I thought, they didn't tell me this part. But it's pretty cool. A little shock to the system maybe, but it's pretty cool. And then I found out how that happened. Because you know what? That doesn't just happen. Joan over here has been after this congregation to sing the Lord's Prayer forever. But Joan wasn't enough. Then you called a pastor who loved the Lord's Prayer. He says, we're going to sing it at the end. So he instituted the Lord's Prayer as the benediction. But that's not where the story ends. As I did my research, I had 3 or 4 people tell me how it happened. And it's about being contagious. That's the best thing. I was told one day, we were singing along, and we got to that part of the song where we now raise our hands and together, a character in this congregation. Actually, just one character in this congregation that day raised his hands like this to God. Now, I think he was holding his wife's hand, so her hand went up too. But that was all. Just Leland. He was responding to God's love and God's power and God's pressure, and he raised his hands. And then he put them down. The next week, we get to that part, and Leland says, I liked it so well last week, I'm going to do it again. This time he had somebody sitting on both sides. So he raised both hands, and I think the person next to him must have been a visitor because they did it too. So in one day, we had one or two. The next week, we had the whole row because they all thought, hey, since this person's doing it, we should do it too. So all the way down the row. Well, not to be outdone, next week, the row behind them had seen it, said, hey, that's kind of cool. If they do it again, we'll play. Leland, the next week, everybody in his row. The row behind, and the row behind them said, oh, wait, they did something new. We should do it too. Isn't peer pressure great? It really is. Then it was reported to me by people who sit in the front that what they saw then was it just sort of moved forward. It was contagious. It was powerful. It's part of the story. You see, we're called to be contagious, and part of being contagious is telling the story, and sometimes telling the story is just like Leland did, showing the response. And sometimes it's about speaking the response. Sometimes you have to do both. You see, that's what this story about the Lord's Prayer at First Christian Church Duncanville helps us understand, is that we share and the power and the story grows. And we may sing the Lord's Prayer at the end of service for the next 200 years. And now you'll know why we do it. There's no man of greater faith in this congregation than Leland. There's no man and couple of greater faith in this congregation than Joan and Otto. And you can go around the room and you can see people of faith and people of power and people of changed lives because of the story. You see, without the story, none of that means anything. You all read about the blind man this morning with me. This is really a story about being contagious and about telling the story. I love this story. At the very beginning, it says, there was a man born blind. Now, just so you know what that means, everybody close your eyes really tight. Some of you are cheating. That's what it's like to be blind. Now imagine that all the time. Imagine the desperateness that that might bring in some of us. There are scholars that want to make this into a theological battle because there is one, but this is about a man born blind. Scripture says there was a man born blind, and as they were approaching the temple one day, Jesus and his disciples got involved in a conversation. That conversation went something like this. Gee, Jesus, what happened? Did he sin or did his parents sin so that he was born blind? You see, in Jesus' day, oftentimes, if you were born blind or if you were born different, it was because of some great sin. Somebody did something wrong. And Jesus looked at him and said, no, neither this man sinned. And I always thought it was kind of an interesting thought. They asked him, did this man sin? And I'm thinking, he was born blind. When would he have had the opportunity to sin? Or his parents? Now, we ask that question because we love to be able to lay blame at the proper feet, don't we? We like to be able to look at the great injustices of this world and say, it's their fault. Depending on who you are, it might be the Democrats' fault. It might be the Republicans' fault. It's almost always the Christians' fault. But we love to be able to lay blame. But Jesus says, no. You don't get to do that. You don't get to lay blame anywhere. Neither of them sinned. But just so you know, this man born blind is going to be one of the greatest tools to the glory of God. And then Jesus does something really kind of gross. He spits on the ground. I thought about having you all practice that, spitting on the ground, but then I realized there's no mud. Just go outside. Somehow I knew that was coming. He spits on the ground and he makes some mud. I always love this part of the story. Jesus is there with this blind guy. And he spits and he makes some mud and he picks it up. You ever wonder what the conversation was between Jesus and the blind guy? Do you think Jesus warned him? I think not, because the blind man would have said, I don't think so. I have a hard enough time keeping my face clean. I'm blind, can't you see? So Jesus reaches out and puts the mud on his eye. You know, really famous sayings came from that. Here's mud in your eye. And what do you do when somebody has a dirty face? You tell them to go wash. So Jesus said, oh, now that I've made your face muddy, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. What's he going to do? His face is muddy. He goes to the pool at Siloam and washes. I want you to notice that in this story, there is no mention whatsoever of what was going to happen. Jesus does not say to the man, now that I've made your face dirty, go wash in the pool of Siloam and you'll come out seeing. He doesn't. He doesn't ask him, do you want to be able to see? It's kind of a redundant question, probably. Puts the mud in his eye and says, go wash your face. And he did. One of the things that this shows us is that if we really want to receive all of the blessings from God, then we might need to be being obedient to what he's told us to do. But that's not this week's sermon. But you might want to write that down. He goes to the pool, washes his face, comes back seeing. Now, he's pretty excited. I mean, after all, he's spent a lifetime in the dark. Now he can see. You would think that there would be great rejoicing, that there would be a party, that there would be dancing in the streets because of this. Turn to a neighbor and say, no way. Because guess what? Nobody believed him. They said, well, you sure look like the guy that used to be at the temple door begging. Who the heck are you? He says, I'm him. No, you just look like him. You just look like him. No, I'm him. No, you can't be him. Yes, I am. I really am. Well, how did you get to see? Well, this guy named Jesus put mud on my eye. You know, I can hear him start to explain what happened, and I can hear him go, they're never going to believe this. Right? This guy, Jesus, he put some mud on my eyes, told me to go wash my face, and I came back seeing. In the words of Bill Cosby and Noah, right. So he goes to church. Surely there he can experience some grace and good news and partying and some congratulations on being able to enter into the whole temple and into the whole worship service and into life itself. And the problem is he went to church, and there were some church people there that weren't too excited about miracles. At least not the miracles they weren't in control of. And you know, that's one of the things about miracles. If somebody's in control of it, it's not really a miracle. He goes in, and the Pharisees there see him and go, hey, aren't you the guy that's been out by the gate collecting alms? What are you doing in here? He says, oh, I've been healed. I can see. And you would think that everybody in the room would have been, woohoo! Right? No. They looked at him and said, yeah, who healed you? Because who you know really is important. That's coming later. He says, well, there's this guy. His name's Jesus. Oh, you don't mean that guy. He can't do anything. He's a heretic. The guy says, I don't know if he's a heretic or not, but 23 minutes ago I couldn't see. And now I see. Yeah, right. How'd that happen? He says, well, this guy named Jesus put mud on my face, told me to go wash my face, and I came back seeing. They didn't believe him any more than anybody else did. So they called his parents. You have to read the rest of chapter 9 to get this. They called his parents and said, Mom and Dad, is this your son? They said, yes. Is he the one that was born blind? And they said, yes. And they said, well, what happened? I love these parents. They're good parents. They said, well, you know, he's old enough. Ask him yourself. It's there, chapter 9, read it. It wasn't the answer they wanted. The blind man again said, Jesus, wash my face with mud, now I see. The story. You see, the story is about how when Jesus enters our lives, we are changed. How when Jesus enters our lives at the point of our deepest, darkest, most painful time and changes us. You see, the blind man isn't alone in the story. Because this is a story that is just as much about you and I as it was the blind man. Because when Jesus comes into our lives at the deepest, darkest, most awful spot, where Jesus comes into where we're blind or where we're hurting or where we're suffering or where we're just being beaten up by life. Jesus comes in and changes us. And we're called to be like the blind man, who again and again and again and again told his story. No matter how disbelieving the people were, he told the story. No matter how off the wall his story sounded, he told the story. So what does that mean for us today? It means we all have a story. The person sitting next to you has a story. The person in front of you has a story. The choir people have a story. The people behind you have a story, because we're all encountering Jesus at different points in our lives. Maybe you're encountering Jesus as the healer, or as the great bearer of forgiveness, or as the great feeder of our souls, or as the lover we so desperately need. Don't know your story yet? Ask one question and one question only. How has God entered into your life and changed you? Maybe it's only in salvation, but wow. Maybe it's made you a better husband, a better father, a better mother, a more loving mother. How has Jesus' entry into our lives made a difference so much that we have to tell people about it? That we have to tell people about it. That's the power of the story. And that's how the story becomes more and more contagious. That's how the Lord's Prayer moves forward and backwards and sideways within just a few short weeks. And that's how the church grew and grew and grew. And that's how our lives can change our world where we are today. We simply have to tell our story. And we all have one. And that, my friends, is the good news. Amen. In our midst today, there may be those who haven't begun the story. And so we would invite you to make the great commitment that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. Accept him into your life. We invite you to do that when we sing, to come forward and do that. Maybe you need a church to call your church home, to base your mission and ministry from, to be a part of the fellowship. We invite you to do that in this place as well by coming forward. But today I want you to think about your story and who you have the ability to share that story with. And as we stand together and sing Blessed Assurance, name that person. Let's stand together for Blessed Assurance. Blessed assurance.
Oh
have been waiting for this.